Hello and welcome to the AI Show, brought to you by Lenovo. I'm your host, Emily Barrett, and I'm thrilled to be your guide through the fascinating world of artificial intelligence. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the AI universe, exploring the latest innovations, the people behind them, and how these technologies are shaping our future. In this episode, I'll be joined by John, who I'll be discussing security and AI with. So let's begin as we take you on our journey through the world of AI. Hi, John. It's lovely to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
No, thanks very much for coming in. So we generally start by asking whoever is with me to do a little bit of an introduction to themselves and where they're from as well.
So my name's John Scott. I've been working in the IT field for the best part of 35 years, pretty much always as an IT trainer. About 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit more, I was working at the Bank of England and an opportunity came up to move into their security awareness training role. I took that. After about a year, I took over the programme and I ran that for 9 years. I then came from there to British Telecom, where my job title was the best job title I've ever had, which is security storyteller. And just shy of a year ago, I moved to Culture AI, who are a human risk management platform, to work as their lead security researcher.
Okay, so a human risk management platform.
Yep.
That sounds pretty technically, it just sounds incredible. So do you want to just explain a little bit around what that actually means?
Sure. So when we talk about traditional security awareness, if I can use that to differentiate, there are a lot of different models for doing it, but where most people are used to it is very much it being a compliance-based approach.
Yeah.
And I watch my wife sometimes, and she works for a large American bank, which I won't name. And she said, "Oh, would you like to see our security awareness training?" I said, "Yes, please." And she did what I call next and guess. You know, literally next, guess at the questions, hopefully got them enough right. And that's a very common approach because it's that compliance approach. The problem is it doesn't really change behaviours. The founder of Culture AI, a guy called James Moore, he used to be a penetration tester, a very successful one.
Okay.
And he said that he never failed to get into an organisation, and it was always because of human behaviour and being able to manipulate human behaviour. So he started a phishing startup about 10 years ago, and about 5 years ago he started Culture AI to actually go beyond phishing. So what is human risk management? Human risk management is about taking a very focused approach on people's behaviours. So we use what we call the measure, reduce, fix framework. We identify behaviours that are happening. We don't guess, we don't assume. We actually look at about 30 different behaviours, more than that now, to see where someone has done something, both positively and negatively. We then aim to reduce by targeted coaching, and the best analogy I can give for that is if you think of traditional security awareness training as your school PE lessons, nobody wanted to do them, everybody hated them, they were about 30 minutes a week and you pretty much forgot everything afterwards. What we're very much doing is looking at sports coaching. So if you're a swimmer, if you're a golf player, you will have a coach who is looking at your individual performance, is looking at where you need to improve, is looking at where where you need to build on your success, and giving that feedback. So we take that very targeted coaching approach, and then to fix the problems, because ultimately that's what we want to do. If there's an error or if there's an issue, then we'll either put in a technical intervention, or we will nudge the person. We'll ask them, "Hey, you've just done this thing. Did you mean to do it? Because if you did, that's fine. You know your job. If you didn't, we think this is risky, and therefore we would like you to do something." And if I give you an example, we had a client not very long ago where somebody put an Excel spreadsheet with an awful lot of personally identifiable data onto an open Google Drive. And it's those two things in combination which make it risky, right? There were several thousand lines. They set a risk tolerance. They said, 5 or 6 lines of personal data, that's low risk. This was high risk because it was thousands of lines of data. And combined with, you can't tell from the outside, but this Google Drive is open to the world. So we flagged it up automatically. The person immediately took the file down. And so we thought, well, that's interesting. That's a behaviour that we want to see. But the speed at which they brought it down was so quick. Let's find out. So we said, do you mind telling us? We haven't looked at the file. This is all done automatically. We've identified that there's personal data in there, but we haven't manually looked at it. We haven't seen it. Can we ask what it is? And they said, ask me in a couple of months. And so we went, okay. That sounds even more interesting.
Yeah.
So we asked them in a couple of months, and they said, yeah, that was all of our redundancy data.
Oh,
and
my word.
Of course, nobody but the person in question should have been able to see that data. It's while they were putting their lists together, and obviously, before the process has started. Had that data got out, it would have caused a lot of concern with the staff. And for us, it was just, look, we can identify two things here. And those two in combination make this risky. But we're not telling you you're wrong, we're just prompting you. And this very much comes from Daniel Kahneman's work in behavioral economics. What we want to do is keep you in system one, keep you in flow state, not interrupt you as much as possible, but when we actually need you to do something, when we think that human intervention is the only thing which is going to resolve this, then we're going to interrupt you. And by doing that, we are telling you, there's as much as possible. We don't want false positives. We don't want you being interrupted 20 times a day. Literally, if we interrupt you, we want you to pay attention to it. And we hope by that way we're being quick, so we're reducing that mean time to resolution down to literally, this thing has just happened, do you want to do something about it? We're being respectful of people's times. We're acknowledging positive behaviours as well, so we do have gamification built into the platform that says, I think when we first set it up, you could get a Ginster's pastry or something like that. But you can have league tables and so on. So it's very much about driving culture change by modelling best behaviours and reducing potentially the weaker ones.
I think that's a really, really interesting way of looking at security training, because she said I've worked for a few large corporations in my life, and every single one of them have a similar approach to security training as the traditional approach that you just described. And I'm not going to lie, everybody approaches it with the next guess. Yeah. And that is obviously, if you're from my security training team, I completely paid attention to the videos. But it certainly sounds like being actually able to understand how humans work feels like a more sensible approach.
Absolutely.
And can I just ask, obviously, this is a fairly new way of looking at things, right? This isn't the way that everybody is doing their security training. So is there a reason why now for looking at how we should change this?
So I think first and foremost, because awareness, let's call it old school, standard awareness training doesn't work. It's useful for sharing knowledge, so it has its place. If you want to say, look, the top risks to our organisation this year are A, B, C, D, and E, you need to get that out to everybody, and that's a message that everybody probably wants to hear. So, a lot of people are talking at the moment about concerns about generative AI and people leaking information into LLMs that you can't get out or you can't remove. Now that might be a concern for this year. So you tell everyone that, you lay out your stall, maybe that's your mandatory training. The real value, and this is what I found when I was working at the Bank of England, the real value is the one-to-one conversations. It's the ability to go and say, Emily, we've just seen this, not in an authoritarian way, but we need we would like to have an explanation, because it might be that you needed to do this, but actually it might not. And if it didn't, what can we do to fix it? And a lot of my thinking on that comes out of work in the safety field, who are probably years, if not decades ahead of us in terms of how do you actually drive the culture that you want to see. And they talk very much about a just and safe culture, which is that if people don't feel psychologically safe coming forwards, then they're not going to, and that doesn't stop them making mistakes, it just means you don't hear about them. So that came out there. But that's really difficult to scale, right? So, I used to joke with a friend of mine who worked in a multinational, 100,000 people around the world, and she said, John, you've got it easy. You can literally just walk to somebody's desk and say, can we have a chat?
Yeah.
You can't do that. I mean, and then COVID proved that we
Yeah,
couldn't do
you
that
can't.
anymore.
Yeah.
So a lot of those personal relationships that come from being in a very tight-knit organisation became more and more difficult. And you don't necessarily build up that trust. So this is what attracted me to Culture AI. It's a different approach. We build trust by being respectful of people's time. We're not going to make you sit through boring, pointless training that we know doesn't do anything, or your organisation isn't going to make you if they believe the way that we do, which more and more organisations do. We are going to only interrupt you when we think it's necessary, and if you tell us that's not necessary, that I meant to do that, we'll learn from that. So it's very much about saying, A, freeing up time for the security team so that they can, rather than, I can't tell you how much of my time was spent downloading CSVs from one system and uploading them to another one. We automate all that. We automate the training completion, we automate phishing, all of those sorts of things. And that frees up the security team's time to say, okay, we now know areas where we're doing really well. Let's go and learn from them. Let's find out why that area has a very low instance rate of sharing personal data in a public channel, for example. What are they doing that's so good? And how do we then put that learning out to everyone else? If we've got an area where it's more high pressure and that they are making more mistakes or they're flagging more risks is a better way of saying it, then let's go and talk to them, not in a you're bad people, but actually to say, okay, what is it about your circumstance that is causing a higher level of risk than the organisation is happy with? And then how do we help you with that? So it's really about freeing up as much time as possible for the security team to give them that ability to, what I've always said is my aim, is to be the friendly face of security. You know, we want to help people. People come into security because we want to secure an organisation. We want to help the organisation do what it does best. We can't do that if nobody likes us.
Yeah, that is certainly a really good way of looking at it, is you need to be able to have that rapport and relationship, to have that ability to work together with some team, someone, whoever that is. And I think especially with security, that becomes a little harder because everybody wants to think that they're doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to be the bad guy, not following the rules.
And
But I think it happens accidentally.
It does. And also I think in some ways it's down to the language we use. I think security can be very militaristic in its language. And even in a good way, you'll sometimes hear people talking about, oh, well, we want people to be the human firewall. And they think they're being very open and accepting. And I go, most people aren't really sure what a firewall is and certainly wouldn't want to be described as one. Let's stop talking about people like machines and talk about them like people. So, yeah, we very much want to emphasise, we want to give teams the tools that they need to free up as much time as they can actually have those positive, those engaging conversations. Because one way you'll learn. A good friend of mine once said that whenever you see somebody bypassing security, they are sending you a message. It just might not be a conscious one. This is a process that is in my way. This is something that's stopping me doing my job. It's very, very rare that somebody's saying, this is, I'm bypassing security to rip the company off or to defraud them or what have you. More often it's, I want to do my job to the best I can. My boss is saying I've got a deadline and you've put this thing in place which blocks me, so I went around it.
Yeah.
The fewer of those conversations we have and the more we listen to them and say, okay, well, what are we doing that's blocking you here? And how do we make that easier? Or, if it absolutely has to be that way, how do we persuade you this is the place where you do need to go through those steps, I'm afraid, because look, the thing that you're protecting is our crown jewels. It's the most important thing to the organisation. So the more you can have those back and forth conversations, you can understand the needs of the business, you can understand that they can understand what we're trying to do as a security team, the better your security culture gets.
Yeah, okay. And obviously, we're an AI show here today. So do you want to talk a little bit around the impact of AI on what Culture AI does, right? Because we'll assume it's a large part of the business.
It's some of the business. So first off, it's possibly not as much as you thought, because when James first started the company, he had this great idea that we could automate everything. The interventions would go out and so on and so forth. And what we found is that Our clients didn't want that. They wanted a level of control. They wanted a level of accountability. They want to be able to say, you know, it's the old joke about computer says no. We can't have that. If we want to build that rapport, we have to have that back and forth, that interaction, that trust, right? So where we see AI especially, first and foremost, I think it is an enabler, both positively and negatively. I was reading a really good book from Sarah Armstrong Smith from Microsoft recently, talking about understanding the attacker's mindset. And one of the things she said is, even with all the AI in the world, there's still a human being who's saying, this is a tool that I'm using to get into that organisation. Yep. And that's a really key thing. It's cyber-enabled crime rather than necessarily cybercrime. So a lot of what we're doing is we're looking at how are people using this. Are they using ChatGPT or Bard or whatever on their own? Are they putting data in there? And if so, can we flag to them that's not the right thing to do? Where I think it's going to be interesting, though, I don't know if you saw the story about the poor finance person in Hong Kong who paid out $25 million because of a deep-faked. But again, cyber-enabled crime, right? That person got fooled into making a payment, and all of the headlines were, the sky is falling, AI is going to take your jobs, etc., etc. Ultimately, that was a process problem. I've never worked, like you, I've worked in a lot of large organisations. I've never worked anywhere where I've been able to pay out $25 million without somebody saying, what do you think you're doing?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, right? There should be process in place to stop that happening. Exactly.
And I think in the same way that the internet makes certain crimes easier, AI will make certain crimes easier, but it's also the defence. Some really interesting work that we've been keeping an eye on, where people are looking at behavioural interactions. So, you know, if you normally come in at 8 and you leave at 5, and suddenly that changes, well, that's a classic sign of insider risk, potentially insider threat. It's something we used to be able to do just by saying, oh, Emily's in early today, again, what are you doing? But, you know, we're seeing more and more systems which are looking at that. Okay, well, let's get a baseline for what's normal for you, and let's flag it. So if we see you normally log in from London and suddenly you're logging in from New York, we shouldn't be blocking your access, but we should be saying,
are you in New York?
Are you in New York? Can we push an MFA request to you to get some, you know, a different channel to say, actually that is you, and so on and so forth. And that, I think, is where AI is going to be really, really useful for security, because it's let it do the dull stuff, let it do the behavioural, let it do the baselining, and flag to somebody who can be accountable. There's I don't know if you know Darknet Diaries. It's another podcast. Sorry, one of.
No. But it's all good.
But it's very security focused, and they had a fantastic social engineer called Rachel Toback on there not very long ago. It's a really brilliant episode. And one of the things she said is, you know, you hear about like MGM casinos being attacked by somebody going in through the help desk. Yeah. And one of the things she said there, as somebody who, you know, with a white hat on, does that exact thing, she said, you will always need a help desk because there are always edge cases. You know, the more we automate things, the more then you enable that help desk to deal with the edge cases, to deal with I've just landed in New York, I've lost my phone, I've lost my laptop, I can't log in, somebody help me please. But what that means is we can now train them better. So in the same way, I think there's a massive use for AI of all forms to help us cut through the noise, to actually say, look, this is actually significant. This is we've worked out what our acceptable bounds of behaviour are. This is unusual even for that. Maybe it's the amount of data that's flowing, or it's the time of day, it's the geographic location, or maybe it's a factor of all three of those that just hits a threshold where we say, okay, a human being needs to look at this and use their judgment to say, is this something that we need to be worried about?
Yeah, and it's using that machine to do that initial pattern spotting, right? To go, this pattern is normal. Oh, hang on a minute, this pattern is abnormal. somebody needs to look at this here, right?
Exactly.
And I think actually a lot of the people who we've talked to on this podcast have said a very similar thing around the idea being, well, we'll automate everything, but actually that's in practice, it's just not what people want. People very much still want that person-to-person interaction, and people want to have that responsibility and accountability that you mentioned as well. So I think it's a really sensible way to go forward and look at things of let the machines do what the machines are good at in terms of pattern spotting, in terms of learning about people's normal behaviour, and let people do what people are good at, which is dealing with the edge cases, dealing with the exceptions. And as you said, we can then train the people dealing with those better to be able to work out whether that is actually something we should be doing or we shouldn't be doing, because they're spending less time looking at all of the day-to-day.
Exactly. And I think none of this is new. I think, when we talk about, again, people worry about deepfake AI, social engineering. I think
going on for years. Absolutely.
But even before that, there have been con artists as long as there have been people. The psychological biases, the cognitive biases that we have are, in some cases, thousands of years old. They go back to when we used to hunt lions on the African plains. That's why they're effective.
Yeah.
Because they're not here in our frontal lobes. They're back here.
Yeah.
They're how we react to things. It's been fascinating. I've had my own little security lab for the last 8 years by having 2 small children, and watching how they learn and how I've had to modify my behaviour to help them has really helped with that. It's going, okay, that reaction, that was there. There was no training, no nothing. That is an unfiltered reaction. Okay, that's interesting, because those are the exploitable things. People will, or the cyber criminals will always use the latest best tools to exploit, to get to their end. But this was Sarah Armstrong-Smith's point. It's still somebody saying, I want that thing over there, and I'm going to use this tool, whether it be a pointy stick or a generative AI model, to get the thing that I want.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really, really crucial point here. AI being used to do crime, it's not just some model going off and doing it on its own. There is a human sat behind that wanting to do that. And it's just a matter of which tool they choose to use. And I think similarly in that defense against it, there is a human there, and it's about picking the appropriate tool to combat that.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, John. It's been an
pleasure.
Absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to everybody at home for joining us for today's episode. Hope to see you again soon.